Last night I had received word that the fleets had finished mustering, so I woke up extra early just in case we got orders to jump. We did not. Instead, we were told to wait and not told why. There had been no word of another assault on Seoul. There had been no word of another fleet joining us. We were seemingly sitting on our asses for no good reason. The uneducated may believe this to be a good thing. Time for rest is always a blessing, they think. Those with experience know otherwise. Time for rest means there's nothing to do, and nothing to do in a war can be a very bad thing. It could mean that the enemy has successfully hidden themselves and are building up their strength to hit you when you least expect it. It could mean that your commanders are getting cold feet. It could mean a ceasefire. Or, and this is most likely the case in this particular situation, it could mean that something very wrong has happened very far up the chain. A glance at my bridge crew told me they were thinking the same thing. A shaking leg, a ring being played with, hands in the ready position, but eyes staring into the middle distance. They're nervous, and as far as I'm concerned, they've got reason to be. An unexpected rest is bad luck. A chime from my comms terminal almost made me jump. To Captain Young. From Omega enclosed is a software patch for your FTLD. Apply immediately. Johnson, I'm sending you a software patch for the FTLD. Apply it, I ordered. Aye, aye, sir. Navigation Officer Lieutenant Johnson replied. My XO, Commander Ying, turned to me and asked, "What's the patch for, sir?" "The stars have not seen fit to provide me with an explanation," I responded, referring to the Admiralty. "Neither has the damned AI. "Apologies, Captain Young," my intercom said with Omega's voice. "I am a tad busy. The patch negates the effect of the Omni-Union warp disruptors." A few seconds of stunned silence passed. This was huge news. We'll be able to dance circles around the robotic fucks. Speaking of robotic fucks. Understood. Thank you, Omega. A bit of feedback for future reference, though. It is much easier to include that information in the communication than it is to provide it verbally, I replied as another chime came from my comms terminal. To Captain Young from Omega. The software patch negates the effect of the Omni-Union warp disruptors. Yes, I figured that out after the first 100 inquiries. You can go ahead and ignore that message, Captain, the AI said with a remarkable amount of sarcasm. Patch is done, Captain, Johnson said. Excellent. Prepare for warp. Await my mark. Now all we've got to do is wait for the rest of the ships to upload the patch, or install the patch, whatever it is. The nervous silence once again settled over the bridge. Another unexpected rest. Bad luck. I tried to find something to do other than watch the comms terminal. A watched pot never boils after all. No joy, I'd already been through my mail and messages. There wasn't anything else to pay attention to either. I caught myself watching the terminal as it chimed again and flashed the two words no captain enjoys reading. Priority 1. Recipients. Captain Young, Captain Trex, Captain Raymond, Captain Williams, Captain Jordanescu, Captain Hollivander. The USS Liberty has been selected to test the efficacy of the faster-than-light drive update that should allow us to warp within the disruption fields that the Omni-Union generate. The team will be comprised of USS Liberty, USS Idaho, USS Aniniach, USS Tokyo, USS Malice, USS Rosgath. Once we arrive at the rendezvous point, the test team will warp into the enemy system. Avoid engagement until reinforcements arrive. Once all 6 fleets are within the system, the test team will separate and rejoin their respective fleets. As I finished the message, I bit my tongue to stop myself from cursing out loud. Nothing kills morale faster than hearing your captain swear up a storm. Well, being selected as a test subject in what could be a very fatal experiment might. I stood up and prepared myself for the announcement I now had to make. Attention. We have been selected as part of a strike team to test the efficacy of the FTLD patch. Our orders are to warp in formation with 5 other vessels while avoiding engagement until we are reinforced by the rest of the fleet, I said. A grin formed on my face as an idea occurred to me. I turned to my XO and asked, Ying, what's our count? 223 corvettes, 118 frigates, 52 destroyers, and 7 cruisers, sir. 7 cruisers. The ships in question had belonged to the Gaunt insurrectionists, who had built them after capturing a system with shipyards. They'd modeled the design after the U.S. cruiser and quickly found out why the U.S. had stopped making them. Cruisers are larger than destroyers, but much smaller than a battleship. So much smaller that they cannot be fitted with the same shield system or reactor network as a battleship, which means that while they pack a punch, they've got a glass jaw. Unlike a battleship. A U.S. battleship, at least. Well, I'm certain that the OU has at least one battleship in the system that we're heading to, don't you think? I asked, my grin getting wider. Oh yes, Captain, I should think so. Ying grinned right back. And we seem to have the advantage of their ship schematics, don't we? We do indeed, sir. I turned to address the rest of my bridge crew. Once upon a time, it was impossible for a destroyer like the Liberty to take down a battleship. The ships on this side of space are built just too damned good. We'd never even make it past their shields, let alone the literal tons of armor plating. I took a step forward. I once believed we'd never get the chance to down one. That changed when I saw the schematics that Intel got for the OU ships. Their battleships are smaller than ours, less armored than ours, and have weaker shields than ours. I tell you, my lovely crew, ever since I saw that Intel file, I've been inspired. I spread my hands and grinned like a madman. I have a dream of glory the likes of which no other destroyer has the balls to grasp, a dream of a challenge the likes of which we may never see again. The crew was on the edge of their seat, smiling wide and waiting for me to say it. My dream is to kill a battleship. This test is a perfect opportunity, don't you think? Yes, sir. We'll have to move fast. We'll warp in formation with the other ships and then warp to the nearest enemy battleship once our weapons charge. I'll take full responsibility, and the Liberty will get her battleship kill, I said, putting my hands behind my back. Aye, sir. I would enjoy helping with your dreams, sir, Omega's voice said from my intercom. Negative, Omega. The kill is ours, and ours alone. You'll have to find another destroyer to joyride on to get yourself a battleship. Get your electronic ass in that little black box in the drop bay and hold on tight. Aye, sir, Omega said in a distinctly neutral tone. It may seem unfair, but I've never liked our dependence on machines to do our thinking for us, especially when it comes to combat. I could tell that Omega didn't wholly disagree with my decision because technically it outranks me and could have ordered me to allow its assistance, or told on me to the Admiralty. The mood on the bridge had changed drastically. The pungent air of nervousness had been replaced with the sweet smell of anticipatory impatience. Legs were still pumping and people were still fidgeting, but it was manically instead of listlessly. A certain unique ping sounded. The USS Nidhogg. A few of my senior officers turned to look at me. They were up for captain soon, so I'd taken the liberty of briefing them on the sound. I gave them a grin, which they returned. Gotta give it to the US, they know how to throw a party. A whistle came over the TACCOM, and Admiral Archibald's voice soon followed. Now hear this. Second Fleet, prepare to warp on my mark. Prepared to warp, sir, Johnson said. Excellent. Warp on the mark, I replied. Mark. The slight lurch and soft tingle of warp enveloped me as I once again took my seat. Prepare to form up once we exit warp, I ordered. Aye, sir. I pulled up the TAC map as we exited warp and watched as we took our position. The other ships were along shortly. Power weapons, sir? No, not yet. We don't want to tip our hand. The TAC map showed 4,203 ships. They didn't appear to be in any particular formation. I scanned for a nice, isolated battleship. A small bit of dread entered my stomach as I noticed the enemy warp disruptors were active all over the system. An objective marker popped up on the screen. Prepare to warp. Preparing to warp, aye, sir, Johnson said. I zoomed in on the objective and nearly jumped with joy. A battleship, isolated from the rest of their ships and with a clear line of sight on where we would be jumping. Command had overlooked it, and I wasn't about to correct them. We've got one. Relaying coordinates. I want to warp to the objective, go weapons hot, and warp to this battleship's stern keel, I ordered. A dick shot, sir? Ying asked with a laugh. As my grandmother used to say, if they're above your weight class, go for the grapes. She lived to be 400 years old, so I assume she knew what she was talking about, I replied. We'll need to be fast. Don't want them stealing our joy. Ready for warp, sir? Synchronize and warp on the mark, I ordered. Aye, sir, awaiting mark, Johnson answered. I didn't get to call the shots on this one. That job went to Captain Trex of the USS Idaho. Just as well, if the squad leader went running off, the rest of the squad would be obliged to follow. If I go running off, on the other hand, Trex won't know what to do, and will have to make a decision, which will buy me time to get my battleship kill. We've got to make it look justified, as if we spotted the battleship after our warp. Wait for 1 second after we exit warp before charging the guns, then initiate our own warp. Once we're under the battleship, open up with, "Warping, sir," Johnson said. "Fuck it, on the fly then. Remember, 1 second after we exit warp. It should take at least that long for the battleship to spot us." "Aye, sir." We exited warp in formation with the other 5 destroyers. It only took a quarter charge of the FTLD to jump this distance, so we had plenty of juice for an additional warp. 1 second ticked by, and our weapons began to charge. "Let's go," I ordered. Entering warp. We exited warp in the perfect position to gut the battleship. Hell, we could probably cut the thing in half at this range if we really wanted to. But we had to be quick, so we were playing poke the reactor. "Chain guns fire," I ordered quickly, feeling the adrenaline surge in my veins. "Chain guns fire, aye, sir." I flicked on the forward cameras to watch the sabot rounds fly out of our chain guns at 8,000 rounds per minute. Special cooling systems and exposure to space kept them from melting. Each round slammed into the battleship's shield, weakening it millisecond by millisecond. "Max ready, sir. Just a bit more." The enemy battleship noticed us and began to rotate to try to bring their guns around. I had chosen this spot for a very specific reason. The only armaments they had in this location were point defense lasers, which were now bouncing harmlessly off of our shields. "Maintain our relative position. Can't let him target us." "Liberty, what the fuck are you doing?" The comms began before I cut them off. Our chain guns kept hammering their shields as our thrusters fired to match their spin. If they'd been any smaller, they would have been able to outmaneuver us, but their thrusters were woefully undersized for their mass. I laughed as I watched their shields shimmer and begin to sputter. "Mach 1, fire," I ordered through my grin. "Mach 1, firing." I watched it fire. The impact was far too much for the weakened shields and armor of the battleship, especially at this range. The ball went deep, but we needed to go deeper. "Mach 2, fire. Mach 2, firing." The second Mach fired a round that followed the first. This one faced less resistance on account of the giant hole the first one left, and the bridge crew cheered as our shields flared due to the radiation emitted by the battleship's reactor core detonating. The TAC map showed their weapons signature fade as the last of their power coursed through the ship. "Enemy battleship dead in space, sir," Johnson yelled. "Ying, what's our count?" I asked with a maniacal grin. 223 corvettes, 118 frigates, 52 destroyers, 7 cruisers, and 1 Omni-Union battleship, sir," Ying shouted back. I allowed a moment of celebration before I said, all right, warp us back to the formation." "Aye, aye, sir." We warped back just as the combined fleet joined us in the system. It wasn't long after they warped in that I was proven correct. The battle didn't last long, and we ended up not being a part of it. Once everything was said and done, we rejoined formation with 2nd Fleet, and I had to explain to Admiral Archibald that I noticed the enemy battleship as we exited warp and engaged immediately with no time to explain my actions to the rest of the test team. He definitely didn't buy it, but he wasn't about to ream my ass over it. Yet. Instead, he ordered me to rejoin 2nd Fleet, get my Marines on the ground, and provide orbital support. "Enter orbit around planet Alpha at these coordinates," I ordered. "Yes, sir. Entering warp," Johnson said, still smiling. "Are the Marines packed for their camping trip?" I asked Ying. "Yes, sir. Snug as a bug in their shuttles awaiting drop," she replied. "Well, let's play taxi service, shall we?" I said with a smile. "Give them the go once we're in position." I found myself in a great mood. The Liberty had a storied history. She had been blessed with bloodthirsty crew after bloodthirsty crew. She had faced off against the toughest opponents and destroyed entire squads of pirates and insurrectionists, but never once in her entire history had she been able to bag anything that could be classified as a battleship. Until now. "So what are they calling this system anyways, Sarnt?" PFC Reinhardt asked Sergeant Gruff. "Don't think it has a name, right, Staff Sarnt?" Gruff asked me. "There wasn't one in the brief. It probably has one of those alphanumerical names like Alpha Zulu Tree Foer Fife," I replied. A few brief chuckles arose when I said Foer, It was one of the oldest jokes in the military, pronouncing the word "for" the exact way that the military phonetic manual tells you to. It all started with a misprint, legend says, way before we ever even got to space. Someone wrote down the pronunciation of "for" as "fower," but put the hyphen in the wrong spot, resulting in "fower." It stuck like napalm, although you'll rarely get in trouble for actually saying "for" outside of training. And the only reason you get in trouble during training is because you get in trouble for anything during training. A fuck-up is just an excuse to make you stronger. What about the planet we're landing on? It's gotta have a name if we're taking it over, Reinhardt asked me. Why do you care? You looking to buy a plot of land to retire on? That's pretty forward thinking there, Private, I replied. That wouldn't exactly be a bad idea. Military service members who are involved in seizing land often get a pretty big discount when it gets parceled up, which gives you plenty of cash left over to build stuff on that land. That would only happen if we kept the planet, and that was a pretty big if. No staffs aren't, Reinhardt answered. Not like we're conquering it anyway, Sergeant Int chimed in. We had all seen the USS Nidhogg exit warp in Alpha Centauri. Brint had fucked up reciting the cycle of operations of the C-21B service rifle, and as punishment Gruff was making him count destroyers. When he stopped, every NCO in the squad looked in his direction to yell at him, but when we saw the dreadnought we found ourselves speechless. The USS Nidhogg isn't a secret, but it's not wholly disclosed to the public. A lot of people know that it can destroy planets, and nearly everyone in the military knows that it wouldn't bother targeting a single planet in the first place. It has megamax that are big enough to turn a continent into a crater, but its primary armament is a beam that can cause a star to go supernova in less than 3 minutes. The reason the dreadnought is so large isn't because of its primary weapon, though. It's big because it has several layers of armor and has been overfitted with reactors and shield generators. 3 minutes is a long time in combat, and the Nidhogg must be able to complete its mission for it to be an effective deterrence. The entire reason the ship isn't extremely classified is to deter xenocidal warfare against the US or its member species. There is something that's secret involving the Nidhogg, though. Earlier in my career I had completed MARSOC and been assigned to Intel. During my time there I was told a lie by my superiors and wanted to prove that they were lying. I think it was probably part of a training program, a test of some sort, but in the process of uncovering the lie, I found out about the Dreadnought Reserve. Dozens, maybe even hundreds of ships just like the USS Nidhogg, all sitting in deep space, completely unmanned and only guarded by a small fleet of VI-controlled ships. I was shocked and appalled at this discovery. One ship signals a wish for deterrence. A fleet signals a wish for an excuse. I learned that this was highly classified information after I had confronted my superiors about it and been arrested. They made me tell them in detail how I came about the information, and thankfully for me I had done so legally. They were forced to cut me loose, but went into excruciating detail on what would happen if I spread knowledge of the Dreadnought Reserve. They plugged the leak and I went on my merry way. That had been the end of my time with Intel as well. They didn't want me poking around any further, and I didn't want to accidentally find more galactic secrets. They did pay me for uncovering the leak, though, which was nice of them. Shady but not evil is the unofficial motto of Bureau of United Systems Intelligence. You would know that they're calling it OU Planet Alpha if you had paid attention to the verbal brief or read your fucking packet, Reinhardt, Gruff spoke up. I didn't read the packet either, to be fair, Corpsman Young provided. Don't even know what the mission name is. It's Operation Vainglorious Infiltration, Omega said. The hell it is. No, it's not. The fuck are you talking about? What possible drug could an AI take to get that high? And a chorus of other negative replies chimed in before I finally stated, It's Operation Vanguard. Tisk, was Omega's reply. If I didn't know any better, I would say that we hurt its feelings. I looked at Gruff, and he moved his helmet in a slight horseshoe shape that indicated he was rolling his eyes. The shuttle shook, which immediately brought us all back to the reality of the situation. Entering atmosphere, our pilot said. Omega, what can we expect the enemy to have armament-wise when we get groundside? I asked. Orbital scans showed infantry, armor, and artillery. They're about as equipped as a standard military, it answered. What about air? Asked Int. Well, they did, but that's no longer a concern. Same with anti-aircraft and long-range missiles. We have complete air superiority, so feel free to call for air support as needed. If you're good, you might even get some orbital support. You'll have to ask nicely, though. I nodded gratefully. Trying to kill a tank without high explosives was a pain in the ass, even as a gen-alt with Guardian armor. Omega continued to answer questions as I pulled up the map of our LZ and our objective. I had briefly glanced at it before we boarded the shuttle, and something about it had bothered me. On closer examination, I was able to see why. Omega wanted his box in a spot that was surrounded by hills. It would have been a decent spot if we were a mortar team trying to take out enemy armor, but as infantry it was the worst place we could be. Omega, I began, is there any particular reason you have our objective in this location? The hills will provide cover from enemy armor, and it should be easy to kill enemy infantry as they crest the hill. Plus, the location is close enough to enemy transmitters to give me an access point to their systems. I searched the map for a moment as the rest of the Marines looked at each other. Then I added a waypoint to a large hill with plenty of flat land surrounding it. Is this location close enough to the transmitters? I asked. Yes. But why? Omega asked. A chorus of laughter rang through the shuttle as the other Marines checked their maps. I don't understand, Omega said. You'll be vulnerable to fire from all directions. When you're on top of a hill, you can use the hill as cover while denying that same cover from the enemy. It's also easier to shoot down than it is to shoot up, mostly due to sunlight and such, Int said. Yeah, that and grenades. Didn't study infantry tactics very much, did ya? Corporal Chang chimed in. Tisk,